What happens when a billionaire CEO, known for his arrogance and ruthless leadership, makes a bet that could cost him everything? When Elliot Grayson, the powerful head of Grayson Enterprises, goes undercover as a regular employee in his own company, he thinks it'll be an easy challenge. But the moment he steps into the real world of his workers, where low wages, toxic management, and impossible expectations reign supreme, his bet turns into a nightmare. And the worst part, his employees figure out who he is. But instead of calling him out, they decide to teach their boss a lesson he'll never forget. Stick around to see how Elliot's own arrogance traps him in a game he never saw coming. If you love stories with shocking twists and epic payback, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below on what you would do in this situation. Elliot Grayson had never been the type to back down from a challenge. He built Grayson Enterprises from the ground up, turning a small logistics company into a billion-dollar empire. His board of directors respected him, his competitors feared him, and his employees, well, they hated him, but that didn't matter. To Elliot, employees were numbers on a spreadsheet, replaceable and disposable. They existed to make the company money, and if they couldn't keep up, they were dead weight. That's why he didn't hesitate when, during a board meeting, his CFO, Mark Dresden, made an off-handed remark about how disconnected Elliot was from his own company. "You wouldn't last a week in the trenches, Elliot," Mark had joked, chuckling along with the rest of the executives. Elliot leaned back in his leather chair, smirking. "Is that so?" "Absolutely," Mark continued. "You have no idea what it's like to be one of your own employees. The deadlines, the micromanagement, the impossible quotas, you'd crack in a day." The room filled with laughter until Elliot raised a hand, silencing them. "I'll take that bet." Mark blinked. "Wait, you're serious?" "Dead serious. I'll go undercover for 1 week as an entry-level employee. No special treatment, no outside help, and if I fail, I'll publicly admit that I was wrong about how easy this job is." The executives exchanged wary glances. "And if you succeed?" Mark asked cautiously. Elliot's smirk widened. "Then I expect every single one of you to stop whining about employee complaints and let me run this company how I see fit, without the constant lectures about empathy and fair treatment." The challenge was set. The board agreed, eager to watch their overconfident CEO fall flat on his face. The rules were simple. Elliot would be placed in one of his company's fulfillment centers as an entry-level worker under a fake identity. No one outside the executive team would know who he really was. He had to last the full week. If he quit or was fired, he lost. Elliot left that meeting feeling invincible. After all, how hard could it be? The very next Monday, Elliot Grayson ceased to exist. In his place stood Eli Grant, a new hire at Grayson Logistics Center 17, one of the busiest warehouses in the entire company. Dressed in steel-toe boots and an ill-fitting uniform, Elliot stepped into the massive warehouse, expecting a simple job, but within minutes he realized something was off. The noise was deafening. Conveyor belts roared, workers shouted over the machinery, and alarms beeped constantly. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, dust, and exhaustion. A clipboard was shoved into his hands by a woman who barely looked at him. "You're late," she snapped. "Station 14. Move." Elliot frowned. Who was this woman talking to? He glanced down at his watch. 8:02 a.m. He was 2 minutes late. "Excuse me," he said, trying to maintain his usual authority. The woman finally looked up and narrowed her eyes. She had short black hair, a sharp glare, and the energy of someone who had been dealing with nonsense all morning. "Are you deaf, newbie? Station 14 now." Elliot clenched his jaw. No one had spoken to him like that in years. But he couldn't blow his cover. Muttering under his breath, he followed the chaotic flow of workers to Station 14, where he was met with his next unpleasant surprise. The job was brutal. The station was responsible for packaging shipments at an insane speed, hundreds of boxes per hour. A grizzled-looking man next to him, Gus, barely spared him a glance before launching into an explanation. You grab the product, you scan it, you box it, you tape it, you send it down the belt, and you do it again, and again, and again. Mess up, you get written up. Move too slow, you get written up. Talk back, you get written up. Questions. Elliot blinked. Too bad. Timer starts now. A loud beep sounded, the conveyor belt whirred to life, and suddenly Elliot was in hell. Elliot struggled from the very first hour. The packages never stopped coming. He barely had time to breathe before another item came down the belt. The scanner wasn't working properly. The boxes kept getting jammed. The tape dispenser stuck, and his arms were already aching. By hour 2, his expensive dress shirt, now swapped for a sweat-stained uniform, was clinging to his back. His fingers burned from constant tape cutting. By hour 3, his knees hurt from standing on the concrete floor. By hour 4, he was completely drained. And when lunch break finally came, he nearly collapsed into a chair in the crowded break room. His hands were shaking as he grabbed his water bottle. Across from him, Gus smirked. So, newbie, how's your first day? Elliot forced a smirk of his own. Easy. Gus laughed so hard he nearly choked on his sandwich. Yeah, let's see how you feel by the end of the day, rich boy. Elliot's stomach twisted. Rich boy. Did Gus know? No, that was impossible. But as Elliot looked around the room, something felt off. The employees were watching him, not with curiosity, but with amusement. And in that moment, Elliot realized something chilling. They knew. Somehow, someway, the employees had figured out who he was. And they were about to make his life a living nightmare. Elliot's grip tightened around his water bottle as he scanned the room. The employees weren't whispering or pointing, but there was an energy, a knowing amusement that set his instincts on edge. He forced himself to stay calm. Maybe he was imagining it. Maybe they were just laughing at the fact that he was struggling. That had to be it. Then Gus lined in, his smirk widening. You ever worked a job like this before, newbie? Elliot kept his face neutral. A few. Gus chuckled. Yeah, you got that soft office worker look. Bet you sit at a desk all day, huh? Elliot swallowed his irritation. He had never felt soft in his life. He built his company from nothing, fought tooth and nail to reach the top, but that was decades ago. He had long since traded hard labor for tailored suits and penthouse offices. Across the table, a younger worker, Sam, according to his name tag, grinned. What do you think, Gus? He gonna last the week? Not a chance, Gus said, popping the cap off his soda. $5 says he quits by Wednesday. Sam snorted. Nah, I say he makes it to Friday, but only 'cause he's stubborn. Elliot forced a laugh. Glad to know you have so much faith in me. Just calling it like we see it, newbie, Gus said, raising an eyebrow. What about you? How long you think you'll last? Elliot met his gaze. The whole week. Silence. Then to his surprise, Gus grinned. Well, look at that. Man's got some fight in him. Elliot took a sip of his water, ignoring the ache in his arms. He could do this. He would do this. No matter how miserable the job was, no matter how much his body screamed in protest, he wasn't going to let a couple of warehouse workers shake his confidence. But the nagging feeling in the back of his mind didn't go away. They knew he was sure of it. The only question was, what were they planning to do about it? The afternoon shift was somehow worse than the morning. The pace picked up, orders doubled. Elliot's arms and back were already aching, but now they burned with every movement. His legs felt like lead. He glanced at the clock. Only 2 p.m. 4 more hours. He pushed through the pain, determined to prove he could handle it. But just as he was hitting a rhythm, his scanner suddenly stopped working. He frowned, pressing the button again. Nothing. A beep sounded next to him. Gus. Problem, newbie? He asked innocently, scanning a package with ease. Elliot clenched his jaw. he knew the scanner had been fine earlier. Something wasn't right. He reached for another one off the cart, also dead. Sam strolled by, whistling as he tossed Elliot a replacement. Try this one. The moment Elliot grabbed it, the belt sped up. Packages started coming twice as fast. He nearly dropped the scanner as he scrambled to keep up. His movements became sloppy. A box slipped from his hands, hitting the floor with a loud thud. Alarms blared. A sharp voice cut through the noise. What the hell is going on over here? Elliot turned to see a short, furious woman storming toward him. Lena, the floor supervisor. That's the third dropped package today. What's your excuse? He opened his mouth, then shut it. Saying someone tampered with my scanner would sound ridiculous. Instead, he gritted his teeth. No excuse, it won't happen again. Lena scoffed, damn right it won't. One more screw-up and you're getting written up. Gus and Sam exchanged a look, barely holding in their laughter. Elliot knew it wasn't a coincidence. They were testing him. By the time his shift ended, Elliot could barely move. His entire body ached. His hands were raw from tape and cardboard. His shoulders felt like someone had been beating them with a hammer for hours. He collapsed onto the nearest bench, sucking in a deep breath. Gus strolled by, tossing his gloves into a locker. Not bad, newbie. You didn't pass out. That's better than some. Sam grinned, but let's see if you show up tomorrow. Elliot lifted his head. Oh, I'll be here. Gus laughed, shaking his head. We'll see about that, rich boy. Elliot stiffened. There it was again. That knowing tone, the same one from lunch. He watched as the two men walked off, chatting casually. Not once did they glance back at him. But the way they spoke, the way they acted, they knew. And now they were waiting for him to break. Elliot dragged himself to his car, sliding behind the wheel with a groan. He had planned to drive straight home, collapse into bed, and figure out how to push through the rest of the week. But as he reached for the ignition, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. A text from Mark Dresden. How's the trenches, boss? Elliot exhaled sharply. Then, before he could stop himself, he replied, Hell. The response came almost instantly. Good, let's see if you can survive it. Elliot stared at the message for a long moment. He wasn't just in the trenches now. He was trapped in them. And if his employees had figured out who he was, this war had only just begun. The next morning, Elliot's entire body protested as he climbed out of bed. Everything hurt. His back, his arms, even muscles he didn't know existed were screaming at him. For the first time in years, he had to force himself to get up for work. He couldn't remember the last time he dreaded stepping into one of his own facilities. Usually, it was in and out, quick inspections, a few firm handshakes, and maybe a speech about productivity before heading back to his penthouse. Now he was about to walk into enemy territory. And the worst part, he had no idea what they were planning next. The moment Elliot stepped inside the warehouse, he felt the eyes on him. The usual morning hustle was in full force, workers clocking in, chatting over half-empty coffee cups, stretching their sore limbs. But as he walked past, people turned. Not in a confrontational way. Not in a curious way. In a way that said they were waiting. Waiting for the next test. He clenched his jaw, pushing forward. If they thought he was going to fold, they were dead wrong. The first few hours of his shift were almost normal. The conveyor belt moved at its usual punishing speed. His scanner actually worked, and no one said a word to him. That was what worried him the most. Gus wasn't smirking. Sam wasn't throwing little jabs. The entire floor was too quiet. Then, just when he thought he might be imagining things, he felt it. The subtle shift in the air. A whump. A small thud in the distance. Elliot turned his head, just in time to see a towering stack of boxes wobbling on the far side of the warehouse. Then, crash. The entire load toppled over, scattering dozens of heavy packages across the floor. A few workers gasped, others immediately backed away, knowing what was coming. And sure enough, within seconds, Lena's voice cut through the noise like a knife. Who the hell stacked these? Elliot barely had time to register what was happening before Lena's glare locked onto him. His stomach dropped. No, they wouldn't. Then out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A single, subtle movement. Gus. He stood a few feet away, arms crossed, looking entirely too smug. Then, without a word, he nodded in Elliot's direction. Sam followed his lead. Then another worker. Then another. One by one, they all turned to him. Lena's eyes narrowed. You. Elliot barely kept his expression neutral. I didn't touch those boxes. Really? Lena crossed her arms. Because I got half the floor saying you were the last one near that stack. His hands clenched. They were setting him up. Lena didn't wait for an excuse. Clean it up, now. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. That's what they wanted. They were waiting for him to snap, to break, to show even a hint of his real identity. Fine. Let them think they were winning. Without a word, Elliot grabbed the first box and started stacking. It took 2 hours. 2 hours of lifting, bending, and dragging, while the rest of the warehouse went back to work. No one helped, no one spoke to him. By the time he was finished, his back was on fire, his uniform was drenched in sweat, his legs felt like they might give out any second. He wanted to collapse. But as he stood up straight, he caught Gus watching him. Not with smugness this time. With curiosity. Like he had expected Elliot to quit right then and there. And now, for the first time, he wasn't sure. Lunch came as a blessing. Elliot barely made it to the break room before slumping into a chair. He could feel the ache settling deep into his bones. He needed painkillers, a massage, a week-long vacation. Instead, he got a lunch tray slammed down in front of him. He looked up. Gus. Sam slid into the seat across from him, grinning. Gotta say, newbie, didn't think you'd actually clean that up. Elliot exhaled, reaching for his water. I don't quit. Gus raised an eyebrow. Yeah, we'll see about that. Elliot knew what that meant. They weren't done. Not even close. And as he sat there, ignoring the pain in his body, one thought kept him going. Neither was he. That night, Elliot dragged himself into his car, exhausted beyond belief. His phone buzzed. Another text from Mark. Still in hell. Elliot stared at the screen for a long moment before typing his response. Worse. A few seconds later, the reply came. Good. Elliot closed his eyes, gripping the steering wheel. One more day down. 4 to go. And somehow, he had the feeling the worst was yet to come. The next morning, Elliot woke up to a full-body rebellion. Every muscle, every joint, every fiber of his being screamed at him the moment he tried to move. He groaned, rolling onto his side. He hadn't felt this level of pain in years, maybe decades. His usual routine of morning runs and weight training didn't even compare to what the warehouse had done to his body. But he didn't have a choice. Slowly, painfully, he forced himself out of bed, got dressed, and prepared for war. The moment he stepped into the warehouse, he knew something was different. The usual glances, the smirks, the knowing looks, they were all still there, but today there was something else. Anticipation. Like they had something planned. Elliot squared his shoulders, keeping his face unreadable. Fine, let's see what they've got. The first half of the shift went smoothly. Too smoothly. The conveyor belt ran like normal. His scanner worked. No accidents happened. That's what made him suspicious. Then, just as the lunch bell rang, Gus appeared at his side. Yo, newbies, you ain't yet. Elliot wiped the sweat from his brow. Not yet. Good, come with us. Elliot narrowed his eyes. Why? Gus just grinned. Initiation. Sam appeared next to him, arms crossed. Unless you're scared. Elliot exhaled through his nose. Fine, led the way. He didn't trust them, not for a second. But if he refused, they'd win. They led him out of the break room, down a hallway, and into the back loading dock. Elliot frowned. Why are we out here? Gus leaned against the railing, pulling out his phone. See that truck? Elliot followed his gaze to an 18-wheeler parked at the dock. Its cargo doors were open, revealing a massive load of stacked crates. Sam grinned. Boss wants it unloaded by the end of lunch. You do it, you're officially one of us. Elliot stared at them. You're joking. Nope, Gus said, smirking. One man, one truck, think you can handle it? Elliot knew this was a setup. There was no way they were serious. But the way they looked at him, waiting, watching, it was a challenge. One he refused to back down from. Without a word, he walked up to the truck, grabbed the first crate, and got to work. 15 minutes in, he was dying. The crates were heavy. Some of them had to weigh at least 60 or 70 pounds. His arms trembled with every lift. His legs burned. Sweat poured down his back. Gus and Sam stood off to the side, laughing, taking bets on how long he'd last. But he kept going. One box, then another, then another. The sun was brutal. The pavement radiated heat. His uniform clung to his skin. But he didn't stop. Not when his vision blurred from exhaustion. Not when his back screamed in protest. Not even when his hands started going numb. By the time the last crate hit the ground, he could barely breathe. Elliot leaned against the truck, sucking in air like a drowning man. The entire warehouse crew had come out to watch. They had all expected him to quit. Gus walked up, eyes narrowed. Damn. Sam shook his head. That's insane. Even our best guys don't do it that fast. Elliot wiped the sweat from his face. That all you got? The crowd burst into laughter. Even Gus cracked a grin. All right, newbie, you earned lunch today. Sam clapped him on the back, almost knocking him over. You're still a dumbass, though. For the first time since starting this job, Elliot felt something shift. The hostility, it wasn't gone, but it had lessened. Instead of smirks of amusement, he caught a few nods of respect. But just as he started thinking, he had gained some ground. Lena stormed onto the dock. And she did not look happy. What the hell is going on out here? The crowd immediately scattered. Elliot straightened, wiping his hands. Nothing. Lena's glare could cut steel. You skipped lunch to play warehouse games. Wasn't exactly my choice. I don't care, you're on my clock. You don't move unless I say so. You got it. Elliot met her gaze. For the first time, he saw it. The exhaustion in her eyes, the stress, the pressure of trying to keep this place running under impossible conditions. And just like that, he understood. She wasn't the villain here. She was just like him, a leader being pushed to the brink. He exhaled, nodding. Got it. She narrowed her eyes, then turned. Breaks over, get back to work. Elliot watched her go, rolling his shoulders. 2 days down. 3 to go. And somehow, things were only getting more complicated. The soreness hadn't faded by the next morning, but Elliot was getting used to it. His body had accepted the pain as a new normal: stiff limbs, aching muscles, a constant dull burn in his back. But the more he endured, the more something strange happened. People started treating him differently. It wasn't obvious, no grand gestures or apologies, but there were small things. Gus stopped calling him rich boy. Sam actually talked to him like he was one of them. Other workers, ones who hadn't spoken to him before, gave him curious glances instead of outright dismissing him. "I'm the biggest change." When the shift started, Gus and Sam helped him. They didn't say they were helping, of course, but when the belt sped up and Elliot started falling behind, Gus just happened to step in and grab a few extra boxes. When his scanner glitched for the 100th time, Sam swapped it with his own without a word. It wasn't kindness, not exactly. It was acceptance. And that meant more than he was willing to admit. But the moment Elliot thought he had finally gained their respect, the real test began. It started with a missing shipment. By midday, the warehouse was chaos. Lena stormed onto the floor, barking orders. "Everyone stop what you're doing," she shouted. "We're missing an entire pallet of high-value inventory. Until it's found, nobody clocks out." A wave of groans rippled through the workers, but no one argued. This was standard procedure. Missing inventory meant lockdown. Elliot frowned. What kind of inventory? "Electronics," Lena said, scanning her clipboard. "Expensive ones. Someone either misplaced them or—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Elliot knew what she was implying. Someone stole it. The tension in the warehouse was immediate. Nobody spoke, but the accusations were already flying. Workers exchanged looks. Conversations dropped into whispers. And then Elliot saw it. Gus and Sam. The two of them stood near the loading dock, their faces set like stone. Not panicked, not defensive. Quiet, calculating. And in that moment, Elliot realized something. They knew something. He walked over, lowering his voice. "What's going on?" Gus didn't answer right away. He glanced around first, making sure no one was listening. Then finally, "It's not missing." Elliot's stomach dropped. "What do you mean it's not missing?" Sam folded his arms. "We mean someone took it, and we know who." Elliot's heart pounded. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't some warehouse prank. Someone was actually stealing from his company. Lena stormed past them, muttering under her breath. Elliot barely noticed. He was still staring at Gus and Sam, trying to piece this together. "Who?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Gus hesitated just for a second. Then he said a name. Elliot's blood ran cold. Because he knew that name. And if Gus was right, this was bigger than just a warehouse problem. This was a full-blown inside job. Lena was still shouting orders, trying to get control of the situation. Elliot's mind was racing. If this person was involved, it meant the theft wasn't random. It was organized, planned. And suddenly, his entire undercover mission had changed. This wasn't about proving himself anymore. This was about taking down the people stealing from him before they figured out who he really was. Elliot's pulse pounded in his ears. If Gus and Sam were right, then this wasn't just some worker sneaking a few extra items out the door. This was an inside job, a coordinated theft happening right under his nose. And if they knew who was responsible, that meant one of two things. Either they were involved, or they were watching something they weren't supposed to see. He kept his expression neutral. "You're sure?" Gus and Sam exchanged a glance. "Positive," Gus muttered. Sam exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Thing is, it's complicated." Complicated. Elliot had dealt with billion-dollar acquisitions, legal battles, and government regulations. Nothing was ever simple. But this was the first time he had no idea what move to make. He wasn't Elliot Grayson right now. He was just another worker, an outsider trying to break into an unspoken world, and if he asked too many questions, pushed too hard, they'd shut him out. So he played it slow. "Tell me what you know." Gus kept his voice low. "Shipments don't just disappear, man. That pallet, it wasn't misplaced, it was diverted." Elliot frowned. "Diverted." Sam nodded, marked as delivered, but it never left the warehouse. His stomach twisted. This was more than just a theft. This was someone with access to the system, someone who could manipulate inventory records without setting off alarms. And Gus had just given him a name. Marcus. Elliot knew the name because Marcus wasn't just some low-level worker. Marcus was a shift manager. Someone with just enough power to cover his tracks, but not enough to act alone. Elliot's mind was racing. If Marcus was in on it, who else was? And more importantly, how deep did this go? Lena's voice cut through the noise. "All right, listen up. We're doing a full inventory check. No one goes home until we figure this out." Groans echoed through the warehouse, but no one argued. Elliot watched as workers scattered, some frustrated, others too quiet. Then he noticed Marcus. He was calm, too calm. No tension, no frustration, just waiting, watching. Elliot had seen that look before. It was the look of a man confident he wouldn't get caught. And that pissed him off. He needed proof. Marcus had covered his tracks well, but Gus and Sam had seen something. That meant there was a crack, a weakness. Elliot just had to find it. Where would he stash it, he asked. Gus hesitated. Sam lowered his voice. "There's a storage room in the back. It's supposed to be for overflow stock, but let's just say no one ever sees what goes in or out." Elliot clenched his jaw. "Oh, hidden stash." If they were right, that meant the missing inventory was still in the warehouse. And if Elliot could find it first, he could take Marcus down. He moved carefully, blending in, pretending to follow orders like everyone else. Then, when no one was watching, he slipped away. The back storage area was exactly what he expected, dimly lit, rarely used, and just secluded enough to be the perfect hiding spot. He scanned the room. Boxes were stacked neatly along the walls. Most were labeled, some were half open. Then he spotted it. A single unmarked crate. Elliot's pulse kicked up. He crouched, running a hand along the edge. The tape was fresh. Slowly, carefully, he pried it open. And froze. Inside, buried under packing material, were the missing electronics. Brand new, untouched. And exactly where they weren't supposed to be. A slow, cold anger spread through his chest. He had them. But before he could move, a voice rang out behind him. "What do you think you're doing?" Elliot turned. Marcus stood in the doorway, arms crossed. And for the first time since starting this job, Elliot realized he might be in real danger. Elliot's heartbeat slammed in his chest. Marcus stood in the doorway, blocking his only exit. His stance was casual, too casual, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. Elliot had been caught. His mind raced. He could lie, make up an excuse, say he got lost, but Marcus wasn't stupid. He knew exactly what Elliot was looking for. And now, Elliot had to talk his way out of this. He straightened, keeping his voice calm. Lena sent me to check stock. Marcus didn't blink. That's so. Yeah, said we're missing inventory. A beat of silence, then Marcus chuckled. Right, because the new guy would be put in charge of checking high-value shipments. Elliot clenched his jaw. Marcus took a slow step forward. You've been asking a lot of questions, newbie. Sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Makes me wonder, he tilted his head. Who the hell are you really? Elliot kept his face neutral. Just a guy trying to do his job. Marcus glanced at the open crate, then back at him. Elliot had two choices. He could play dumb and hope Marcus let him walk out. Or he could push back. And Elliot Grayson had never been the type to back down. You know, Marcus, Elliot said slowly, crossing his arms, for a guy who's supposedly running this shift, you seem real interested in what I'm doing. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Elliot kept going. Almost like you've got something to hide. The air in the room shifted. Marcus's jaw tightened. You got a real big mouth for a rookie. Elliot took a step forward. And you got a real big problem, he shot back, lowering his voice. Because that pallet didn't disappear, it was stashed, and now I know where. A flicker of something crossed Marcus's face. Doubt, worry. Elliot pressed harder. You want to explain that. For a split second, Marcus hesitated. Then, he smirked. You don't know a damn thing. Elliot exhaled sharply. He had him. Marcus was on the defensive. That meant Elliot was right. But Marcus wasn't stupid. His smirk widened. You think you found something? Go ahead, tell Lena, tell corporate, see how far you get. Elliot's stomach twisted. Marcus wasn't worried. Because he knew something Elliot didn't. Marcus took another step forward, lowering his voice. You don't get it, do you? This place, it runs on favors, on loyalty. You think Lena's gonna listen to some newbie over me? Elliot's blood ran cold. Marcus wasn't bluffing. If he had asterisk protection, someone higher up covering for him, asterisk, then even if Elliot reported this, it wouldn't matter. The realization hit like a gut punch. This wasn't just Marcus. This was bigger. A slow, smug smile crept across Marcus's face. Now be smart, walk away, pretend you didn't see anything. Elliot clenched his fists. He had two options. He could walk away, or he could go all in. And there was only one choice he could live with. He met Marcus's gaze. Not a chance. Marcus's smirk vanished. For the first time, his expression darkened. You really don't know when to shut up, do you? Elliot braced himself. Then, before Marcus could move, a voice echoed down the hallway. Yo, newbie, you in here. Marcus froze. Elliot turned toward the entrance. Gus, perfect timing. Marcus stepped back, his face unreadable. Guess we'll finish this later. Then, just like that, he walked out. Elliot exhaled slowly. Gus appeared in the doorway, raising an eyebrow. What the hell were you doing back here? Elliot wiped a hand over his face. Finding trouble. Gus snorted. Yeah, well, looks like trouble found you first. Elliot's mind raced. Marcus wasn't just stealing, he had protection. That meant Elliot had to be smarter, faster, one step ahead. Because now, this wasn't just about survival. It was about winning. Elliot sat alone in his car that night, staring at the darkened warehouse through the windshield. His body ached, his mind raced, and for the first time since starting this insane bet, he wasn't sure he was going to win. This wasn't just about proving a point anymore. This was real. Marcus wasn't some disgruntled worker pocketing supplies. He had protection, a system, and the confidence that no one could touch him. And Elliot knew exactly what that meant. Corruption ran deeper than just one man. Someone higher up was letting this happen. And if Elliot played his cards wrong, he wouldn't just lose the bet, he'd lose his entire company. The next morning, Elliot walked into the warehouse with a plan. He didn't need theft accusations. He didn't need corporate interference. What he needed was Marcus to expose himself. And there was only one way to do that. Set a trap. During lunch, he found Gus and Sam in their usual spot. I need your help. They looked at him skeptical. With what? Gus asked. Elliot exhaled, catching Marcus in the act. Sam's expression darkened. Man, I told you, it's complicated. So uncomplicated, Elliot shot back. Gus crossed his arms. You don't get it. If Marcus goes down, he's not going down alone. He's gonna drag other people with him. Elliot clenched his jaw. That was exactly what he needed. Marcus wouldn't protect his allies if he felt cornered. He'd start talking. And when he did, Elliot would find out exactly who inside his company was involved. But for now, he had to get Gus and Sam on board. I don't care how deep this runs, he said firmly, but I need proof, and you two know exactly how to get it. Gus hesitated. Sam looked away. Then finally, Gus sighed. You want to catch him, fine, but you better be ready for what happens next. They worked fast. Gus and Sam knew Marcus's patterns. They knew when he worked, when he disappeared for extra meetings, and most importantly, when he moved stolen inventory. And tonight. Tonight was one of those nights. Elliot hid in the back storage area, crouched behind a stack of crates. He felt ridiculous, a billionaire CEO, hiding in a warehouse like some low-level spy. But as he sat there waiting, something hit him. For the first time in years, he was actually in his company. Not in a conference room. Not in a shareholder meeting. Right in the trenches. And for the first time, he understood. This place was broken. Not because of the workers, but because of management. And he had let it happen. He swallowed the thought down. He'd deal with it later. Right now, he had a snake to catch. Footsteps. Voices. Elliot held his breath as Marcus entered the storage room, followed by two other men. One of them, Elliot recognized. A regional manager. His stomach turned. This ran even deeper than he thought. Marcus moved to one of the crates, pulling out a box. Shipment moves tonight. You got the buyer set. The manager nodded. Truck comes in at midnight. We move it, no questions asked. Elliot's pulse pounded. That was it. Proof. Evidence. And then, the manager stiffened. Wait. Elliot's heart stopped. The man turned slowly, eyes scanning the room. We're not alone. Well, that Elliot ran. He shot up from his hiding spot and bolted. Shouts erupted behind him. Footsteps pounded after him. Adrenaline burned through his veins as he sprinted down the corridor. He needed to get to the floor, to Gus, to Lena. Then a hand grabbed his shoulder. He twisted, shoving his attacker off, but another man grabbed him, slamming him into the wall. Marcus's smirking face appeared in front of him. Guess you weren't just another dumb newbie, huh? Elliot glared. Marcus cracked his knuckles. Too bad you're not getting out of here. Elliot braced himself. Then a voice rang out. Let him go. Marcus froze. Elliot turned and saw Lena standing at the end of the hall. Behind her, half the warehouse crew. Gus, Sam, other workers, even the ones who had ignored Elliot before. And they looked pissed. Marcus stepped back. This isn't your business, Lena. Lena's eyes burned with fury. It is now. The next few moments happened in a blur. Marcus's guys backed off, workers stepped in. Someone Elliot didn't even know who grabbed a phone and called security. And just like that, it was over. 2 hours later, Marcus and his crew were being escorted out in cuffs. The stolen inventory was recovered. And Elliot Grayson. He stood in the middle of the warehouse floor, exhausted, battered, and completely stunned. Gus walked up next to him. Hell of a week, huh? Elliot let out a sharp laugh. Yeah, you could say that. Sam smirked. So, you gonna make it the full week, or you quitting now? Elliot turned to them, exhaling. Then, for the first time, he said the words he never thought he'd say. I'm staying. Gus blinked. Wait, seriously? Elliot nodded. Yeah, I think I have a lot to learn. And just like that, the bet didn't matter anymore. Because Elliot Grayson walked into this warehouse as a CEO. But he was leaving it as something else. A leader. Elliot Grayson walked into his own company thinking he had all the answers. He believed his workers were just lazy, replaceable cogs in a machine. But after one brutal week in the trenches, he learned the hard way that leadership isn't about sitting in an office. It's about understanding the people who keep the company running. And when corruption nearly destroyed everything, it wasn't the executives who saved the day. It was the very workers he once dismissed. So what do you think? Would Elliot have ever learned his lesson if he hadn't gone undercover? Let us know in the comments below. And if you love stories with unexpected twists and shocking moments, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.